All right. I've got
Great.
6:37. We should start rocking and rolling.
Yeah, I agree.
Everybody can see the slides. So I'm going to move on to the next slide. We know what day it is. I just threw this together. I was looking at uh, I tend to hang out on some audio review sites or other places, and so I was just kind of curious about what some of the newer products are that are coming out. And so I was looking at reviews. These are all links, and so when you get a copy of the slides, you'll be able to click on the links that are on this page and open those up. SMSL is one of these chi-fi companies, and they've got a new DAC. Most of their DACs, tend to be kind of in the $200 or so price range. They've got a few that are closer to 1,000, but they tend to be on the lower end of the price scale. But they've got this new DAC. It's a successor to the SU8. I don't know what SU stands for. I didn't look that up. But the SU9 DAC is one of the best stacks that Amir over at Audio Science Review has ever measured, and it's only $440. Measurements don't tell the whole story, so it measures really well. Does it sound really well? How does it sound when you connect it up to different preamps or amplifiers? There's interaction with the devices and power supplies and cables and all the stuff that us audiophile people love to talk about. But you know, I would say a really solid objective measurement is a good starting place, and the stack's objective measurements are ridiculously good. So I would say it's worth checking out if you've got $440 that you just want to experiment with. You could do worse than picking up one of these things. And I'll talk about this a little bit more later. But I bought over the last few weeks. I bought 3 roughly $100 DACs to kind of experiment with. And one of them was from SMSL, and I was very impressed with their $100 version of this thing. So I'm sure the $440 version is even more impressive. Topping is another one of these very popular chi-fi companies. They tend to have their D90 DAC is very popular. They just came out with a new headphone amplifier, actually a couple of them, and apparently they're both ridiculously good as far as headphone amplifiers go. So for people who, I think probably most of us have a 2-channel speaker system somewhere in the house, but for those of you who also have a little table someplace that's got a headphone rig on it, or if you're like me and you're working from home, and sometimes you like to throw on some background music and not have it sound terrible, little products like this for around $150 or so, plus or minus, are really, really nice. And then Sonore have come out with a couple of new products as well. I don't have a lot of detail on them, but if you're familiar with network audio adapters and the whole signalist idea of separating your music server from your audio system really by a network connection in order to get your system to be as quiet as possible, it's a thing that we keep harping on. The Sonore Micro Rendu, the original one, was one of the original products that enabled folks to do that. I mean, this product has been around for a decade, I think, but they just came out with a new version of it.
6 years.
Yeah, it's been a while. Well, they just came out with a new version of it. It's around $400. If you remember, the original one I think was around $900 when it first came out. So
no, $650.
Oh, was it? I was thinking it was more. But anyway, I might have been looking at a different thing. But anyway, this seems to represent good value for money in a format that's pretty popular. It's a small little device that's basically Ethernet in and USB out. Runs a proprietary kind of operating system that is Linux based, we presume. That does a good job of not letting the network noisies get into your DAC, and enable you to put your DAC on a network. And it supports a whole bunch of different protocols. So it's not just limited to Roon. So pretty cool. And then they've got this optical module deluxe, which is in ways that are not perfectly obvious to me, slightly better than the regular optical module. It supports 100 megabit as well as gigabit and has fancier internals. If you're into optical networking, might be worth checking out.
Yeah, let me speak to both of these just a little bit because I did some research on them.
Okay, good.
So let me take 90 seconds to kind of talk about them. The new Micro Rendu is $399. The original Micro Rendu 1.4 was $649, I believe. So it's a fairly significant savings. They've completely reworked the internals. I don't know if it has the same clock that the original version 1.4 hardware, the last version of Micro Rendu did or not. Jesus is not very forthcoming about specifications in new devices or upgrades at all. And so he doesn't basically tell you. I did read a very positive review about it on audiophile style, what used to be called computer audiophile. The guy who bought it was very, very happy with it. And he said it for $399, it was a very good value. I think he bought it with the roughly $100 small green computer power supply as well. So he was running it with that. So for less than $500, you can get a potentially a killer streaming setup. The optical module deluxe, David just touched on this, but the point of this is that the original optical module was only gigabit out, and there are certain network bridges and or Ethernet capable DACs that only supported 100 megabyte in, and so you couldn't use optical module with things that did not accept gigabit in. And so this is to give you the benefit of both functionalities, either 100 megabit into your network bridge or network audio transport, or your DAC if it's an Ethernet capable DAC. So that's and again, it's not clear on the Sonore site as to what it's for, but that's what it's for. So some additional context for you guys.
Anyway, not very expensive. Just buy one. I'm sure you'll find a use for it.
Yeah, I have the optical module, and it performs very, very well, and it made a notable improvement over a generic fiber media converter.
All right. Let's see. What else? What have we got on this slide?
These are just some videos that I'm not going to speak to them, but there's a link in here. You guys can download the slide deck, and I just found these links to be informative. Hans is always very informative. If you don't know him, you should. If you're into digital audio, he's great. So just some additional information and reviews for you guys on some new products.
There you go. So some homework later on if you want to take a look at some of these things. And I mean, maybe most of you have subscribed to Hans and John's YouTube channels. You may or may not like their style, but it's worth subscribing, I think, just because you get clued into new products like these that you might not otherwise, even if and you can read about them or learn about them someplace else if you like a different kind of take on them.
Yep.
All right, cool. Stephen, okay. I will let you take it away. So you're going to show us kind of some examples of how some of these things are put together, and I'm going to watch the chat for questions.
Okay, great. So we took this content basically from some of the questions that we had last time. We got some really good input about how let folks get started in digital streaming and why. So I always like when I used to do training, in my previous job, in my corporate job, I always like to provide context to help people understand, not only what they should be doing, but why. It helps drive kind of a greater and deeper understanding. So let's see here if I can get the next slide to come up here. So this content was, so for now I can't, oh, there we go. Okay, oops, sorry, there's the latency.
We're both doing it?
All right, so yeah, we got it. So, I just kind of put this question together in terms of answering one of the, so now we're.
My presentation somehow.
You want to, I'm going to let David recover the presentations mode here. Oh, you know what? I hit exit, David. It took us out of presentation mode. So let me go back one slide. There we go. Present from beginning. Sorry, guys, about this little snag. So Google Slides is a little bulky. It works pretty well, but it's not as smooth as, say, PowerPoint for presentations quite yet.
All right, I think.
Can you go back one slide, David? There we go. Whoop.
Right to here.
There we go, right here. Okay.
Okay. Cool.
So this first question, kind of was driven by one of the questions from our members. Why would someone be interested in this, in the first place? Why are we talking a lot about this? And, this gets back to the really nice presentation David gave to the group in person in February. But I think for me, the compelling value proposition here is it provides a really flexible way to access digital music content, either files from ripped physical media such as CDs or SACDs if you have the appropriate type of device to rip from SACDs, and or from streaming services to your DAC. And so you're not limited anymore by one format, files resident on a hard drive and or files that you're streaming from a streaming service like Tidal or Qobuz. You can actually access both with the same level of ease now. And for example, Roon, lets you do this very, very easily. The other thing with interfaces like Roon is that the the way that they structure that information, the interfaces, the applications are really powerful and more informative than physical media, right? When you have a CD, you've got maybe a little booklet with some information about the performance there, but I find the metadata in the streaming services and content provider interfaces like Roon to be much richer, and they lead you to being able to discover related content when you go into radio mode. So that's point two here, is that you're not limited by a linear form like we used to with LPs or CDs, where it was track one, track two, whatever, right? We would tend to listen to the music from front to back, right? Track one through track 10 or 8 or whatever it was. Now you can kind of move around in a nonlinear way. You can listen to just one song, go into radio mode, find something that's related, or you can listen to an entire album, and then maybe radio mode will take you into something that's related as well. The other thing that's nice here is the metadata that comes with a lot of this content is really informative, right? So I often listen to jazz recordings, and I'm listening to, Oscar Peterson meets Ben Webster, and I want to know who's the bassist. Well, it's Ray Brown, and then you can click on Ray Brown. You can get all sorts of information about Ray Brown's career, as well as access to the content that's in your library or the streaming services about Ray Brown. So it's a really, really powerful way not only to enjoy the music content that you have already in your library, but I think for me, and I think David can speak to this as well, discovering new content that you didn't know about. And I think that's where the real value proposition lies.
Yeah, I think I
In
showed you
streaming,
guys,
and
some
yeah,
saved searches that I have in Roon where I can say, okay, show me all the albums that were mastered by Doug Sachs, Bob Katz, Bernie Grundman. I've got like a half a dozen different Alan Yoshida, different people that are really good mastering engineers. It's
yes,
really interesting to see what cross section of your music library, for example, comes up with these mastering engineers. I mean, as audiophiles, we tend to like albums that actually sound good in addition to having great musicianship. You can search for musicians as well if you want to, but it's fun to be able to do that kind of stuff. And you can open up your CD and get all kinds of information in the liner notes if you can read it. My eyes are getting too old, so I can't even read the small print in the liner notes that much anymore. But if you find something that's useful there, you're not going to be able to cross section that in the rest of your library probably like you can with a software tool. So that's really, really good stuff. Yeah, good points. Ready for the next slide?
yes.
All right.
So again, this is just a follow on from some of the questions we got. What's an easy way to stream my existing ripped content? So I put up here in bold kind of just a very simple, high level kind of functional flow. You have a music server, you have some sort of network connection, and then you have something like a network audio transport. We talked about that in our last meeting a month ago, and then some sort of DAC. And what I've done here is I've also taken some input from our questions. Some folks wanted to see some, just suggestions or recommendations for entry, mid, and high level streaming setup. So I just listed again, just some examples that I would say are reasonably common that David and I see other folks using widely, right? This is not me saying you should buy this and you should buy that, right? These are just things that I think David and I would agree that we see people using frequently at these various price points. What's not advisable is taking your laptop and taking a USB cable and sticking it right into the USB port of your DAC. That is a bad idea. I think David spoke to length about that in our meeting on February and gave us a lot of good reasons for that, so I won't rehash that. There's other times where we've got newer devices which are kind of like dedicated streamers. So we've got things like the Inuos Zen Mark III, or the Bryston series. The other one would be like the Arender devices are similar to this, where they provide a network connection. They have some sort of onboard storage generally within them, or you can attach an external storage drive to them. And then they basically, take the content generally that's within them and then send it, to a DAC via USB. So they have a way that you can connect to your network, so you can access the content via some interface like an iPhone or a tablet or computer. But generally, these dedicated streamers again, everything is a little different, but they typically have content with, stored in them, or by plugging in something like a USB stick or something like that. The Bryston allows that, for example. So that's just, another example. The third question was, how would you integrate the streaming setups with a streaming service like Tidal or Qobuz to try them out before purchasing a subscription? For example, I don't use Tidal anymore, but I use Qobuz. You can set up an account with a 30-day trial. You can literally listen to Qobuz, and I'm sure Tidal's the same as way, just on your phone. And you can access all your content from your trial or subscription from your iPhone. So you don't need a streaming setup to try it out to make a decision if you like it. I actually use Qobuz with the phone in the car all the time. And then there's things like network audio players like Blue Sound and the Arkham RPlay. These are not Roon endpoints, but they do let you access typically streaming services like Tidal or Qobuz through other similar applications. And then Roon, if you're a subscriber to Roon, Roon provides very nice seamless integration with Tidal and Qobuz. And interestingly, and David, you might be able to speak to this as well. I find that the Roon interface for Tidal and Qobuz is better than the native Tidal and Qobuz interface, just in terms of accessing the content. So anyway, next slide. I think that's, so the next couple slides are just some diagrams here to show you guys some examples.
Sadly,
and we'll finish.
the native Roon interface is not available for Android Auto or CarPlay, Apple CarPlay yet. So if you're in your car or you're out for a run or whatever, you're kind of stuck with the native interfaces for now. I understand that Roon Labs guys are toying with the idea of some sort of remote access model, but for now, Roon from Roon Labs lives in your house, and that's what you use when you're within the confines of your compound. But when you're out and about, which hopefully we will start to be able to do soon, you'll have to do something else.
Yeah, you can actually use the Qobuz app itself to access your subscription via your phone, your smartphone. So I just put together some diagrams here just to kind of show people what entry-level streaming setups would look like. And I'll just kind of take you through what the diagram looks like. But typically you have some sort of music server. I just put a Mac Mini in here because that's what I own. You could use an Intel NUC or a laptop or whatever. And then you can connect to some sort of switch with that device. And if your router doesn't have RJ45 jacks on it, you can connect your router to that switch as well. I don't know if you guys have used these switches, but basically you just plug everything into them and you can send out to a destination from the same switch with jacks on the same side. There's no front or back. You just plug things in and then things go where they're supposed to go properly. In my personal case, my router actually has some RJ45 jacks on it, so I actually don't use the Ethernet switch shown here. And then of course you have some way to connect that to some sort of endpoint. Again, this is an entry-level streaming setup, so you might have an AlloDigi 1 or the new Sonore Micro Rendu 1.5, something that functions as a network audio transport. So your Ethernet cable plugs in to this at one end, and then you go out from that via USB to the DAC of your choice. So that's just a real basic streaming setup. Okay, maybe just have the next slide here. I don't want to belabor this, but this is just an example of a mid-level setup. I just again put my example in here where my router also has switches, so I don't need a switch in between. Or you can buy the new Ether Regen and use that as a switch. I can testify to or provide a testimony to how well that works as a switch. And so you can connect both your music server and your router into that, go out B side of that, then to your endpoint, and then from your endpoint via USB to your DAC. So I can tell you for a fact that these two devices, the SMS 200 ranges in price from about $500 to $1,000, depending which model you get. The Ether Regen 640. These two classes of devices, this mid-level, will get you significant sonic improvements over simply running an Ethernet cable, into some sort of network, less expensive network audio transport, and then onto your DAC. So there,
One of the
this
things
is,
that's nice about this
yeah,
topology is that you're kind of separating your network into a clean side and a dirty side, right? So the dirty
that's right.
side is where your music server lives, and it's where your NAS, if you have one, if you had a Synology or a QNAP or whatever, where you're storing your
Yep.
music. It's where your internet is. All that stuff's on the dirty side of this audio switch, and then on the clean
That's
side,
kind of,
that's where you
yeah.
keep your audio components.
Yeah, and that's kind of the dirty side's kind of the blue area here, right? David
Yeah.
made raised a really good point, right? There's lots of crap. My review of Ether regions coming out in December, for Absolute Sound, and I went into length there about all the various classes of noise that we get from things like routers and switches and modems and music servers, and all that stuff puts out all sorts of noise onto the ground plane that affects timing and jitter and threshold jitter, all that, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, that's the dirty side David's referring to. The nice thing is these devices give you a clean side to run out of down to your endpoint, whatever that might be, an Allo, SMS 200 SODEM, or an or Rendu, whatever it is, right? You've got clean stuff going into that. This makes a big difference on the audio quality. So now your DAC is getting a clean signal from your server, and it's really noticeable. So just and these are simple setups, right? Shown here, and then this is just a high level, same idea, except that in this case, the network audio transport, and the DAC are just higher level, right? And I haven't heard an Eric or like Aries G2. Hans, has one. He says it's better than his SODEM SMS 200 Ultra Neo. So I believe him. It should sound better because it's 4 times the price. And Total DAC is a superb DAC, and you can go from, I don't know, anywhere from $10,000 to $20,000 for those. So again, you will see increments, big increments, probably going up to this level in terms of the audio quality. Now, the thing is about these, I think David has this philosophy, and I do as well. These things are expensive, and do you want to make that kind of investment when this area is changing so rapidly, right? Some folks may want to, but other folks, may kind of prefer to kind of live in the entry level to mid level area, because this area is changing so quickly. And again, everybody has to kind of decide that for themselves. So I think we're kind of past our 20 minutes a little bit here, and I think that's all I've got in terms of slides I want to speak to. And I think it also speaks to some of the questions we had about, how is this beneficial in terms of why streaming? How do I use, a streaming setup to access my RIP content and online content from a streaming service? And then some examples of various setups here. So, David, I'll let you
I
speak to
thought I'd share
this.
this as well
Yeah.
because I think there's some patterns that tend to reemerge in the audio space, right? So back in the 80s when my interest in audio first started to peak a little bit, my best friend's dad, he introduced me to his amazing stereo receiver, which wasn't completely unlike the one that's pictured here from Marantz, who's happened to be a pioneer, but the same idea. You had this tuner with this amazingly smooth dial. You had these switches and toggles that had this nice funk type of feel to them. But you had all this stuff in one box. So you had the radio with its radio frequency, whatever stuff, and the preamp functionality and the power amp all sharing the same power supply, all sitting in the same enclosure, with all the kind of positives and negatives of all that stuff. But that's kind of what we did back then. But then, once I grew up and became an adult audiophile of my own, I realized that there were some benefits to be had in separating some of these things out. So, when I got nice speakers, I wanted to buy a power amplifier that worked with those speakers. And if I got different speakers, I might want a different power amplifier, because you want to give the speakers what they want in terms of power. But I didn't necessarily want to change out everything else in my system. If I had a really nice preamp, I'd want to be able to use that for maybe a longer period of time. And then the source, tuner or CD player or whatever, those things I'd want to have as separate components. In the digital world, we're kind of nudging you guys in the same direction, right? So instead of an all-in-one box that is basically this stereo component streamer thing, separating things out so that you have a separate DAC and a separate network audio transport and a separate music server. So 3 kind of separate components that are all connected over your home network. or in the case of the network audio transport in the DAC, maybe they're connected via SPDIF or USB or whatever. But having those as separate means you can, I bought 3 different DACs. I don't have to buy 3 different network audio transports as well. I can use them with the one that I have, and I can experiment with them and try to figure out which I prefer. And then if I get bored with the DAC, I can buy another one without changing anything else in my system. Or if there's some sort of quantum leap in network audio transport technology that I want to explore, or take a look at the new MicroRendu 1.5, because these things are all compatible, I can replace that transport piece without changing my DAC, and maybe my DAC's performance will get a little bit better because I changed that that component further up in the chain. And if I'm happy with my music server and it's keeping up, I can keep running the same music server until I get bored with it. So this whole separates concept that applied to some of our analog components back in the previous century, that whole concept still applies here. You could say maybe that people are just trying to get you to buy more things. If you go to the Roon community, a lot of people are kind of against this idea of separating things out because they think people are just trying to take your money. But I think there are some real benefits there. I think maybe these people just haven't given it a try yet. I think once you do, you start to realize what some of those benefits are. And then the other thing is when you're building up a streaming system in your house, like as some of you are pretty far along in this kind of thing, so you start to realize that you have 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 different zones in your house that you can play music now. So all that gear finds a place. It's not like you're putting it in your garage or throwing it away. You just have more systems. And that's, I mean, it's a hobby. It's supposed to be fun. So that's what you do. I have a music slide that we can talk to a little bit. I don't know. I was just looking at some of Roon's recommendations for me for the week, and there's this new John Williams album, John Williams in Vienna, that came out. Sounds really good. This guy's one of my music movie heroes. I grew up listening to all this stuff, and so every time I hear anything that he composed or that he's conducting, it just takes me right back to that time. And this is a Deutsche Grammophon, well put together album, definitely worth a listen. I think the link here that I've got should take you to that album on Tidal, but if you don't have Tidal, you can find it other places easily enough.
Yeah, and then I was listening to some stuff earlier this week, and doing some kind of serious listening to the system, and again, Roon Radio Mode, this back-to-back came up with Duke Ellington and Johnny Hodges, and I had not heard this album. This album's been out for, gosh, 40, 50 years now. I don't know how long. Certainly as LP and CD, but this came up in the radio mode from Qobuz, and it's really remarkable. It's a beautiful, wonderful performance, and the mastering and recording is exceptional. There's exceptional sense of acoustics and hearing kind of secondary decay and things into the space, and it's musically, it's absolutely wonderful. So I don't know if you guys know of this particular jazz recording. It certainly was new to me. Again, this is the advantage of the sorts of things I discover with Roon all the time. So it was a wonderful find. And if you aren't familiar with it, check it out. If you are, I would recommend you go back and give it a listen once more, because it's really wonderful.
Cool. And I'll add a link, or you can add a link later on. I think there's a way to go into, I guess there should be a way to go into Qobuz and find the link for it.
Yeah.
I can provide the title link easily enough.
Yeah. And you can always just do a search on Qobuz for it as well. It'll find it right
up. Yeah.
Yeah, it will.
Pop right up.
Yep.
All right, cool.
Very good.
As far as Q&A goes, I know Stephen already covered some questions early on. I put this one in here, seeded this myself, since I was looking in one of the Roon communities and people were asking about this kind of stuff. One of the things that people have been asking about is Tidal has started to add Dolby Atmos music to some of their selections. There's a very limited number of platforms that they support that on. It looks like Android phones is one platform. I'm not really sure, since I only have 2 ears, I don't have 9.6.4 ears or whatever you have to hear Atmos. I'm not really sure that I understand what the practical application of Dolby Atmos music is for headphones listeners, but I should give it a try sometime, I guess, and see. And Sony has come up with kind of their own notion of object-based audio. That's what kind of all these things are, right? And I went to when our club went to Dolby Labs in San Francisco a few years ago. I don't know how many of you were able to go on that as well. I know I saw some of you guys there. It was a fascinating tour, and they took us into a mixing room and they showed us that was set up for surround sound, object-based mixing. And they showed us how they can take a monaural source, a monaural signal, and with the software, they can grab that signal with a mouse or a trackball and move it around in 360 space. And the software will programmatically track where that source is, and it will store that information digitally in the track. And it's not locked to 5.1 or 7.1 or 9. Whatever or 11. Whatever. It's just storing like a PDF. It's just storing the XYZ coordinates, right, of where that object should sound. And then during playback, as I understand it, the that information is stored for each track. It's stored in the audio file itself or in the stream, and it's up to the processor that's decoding the music to work out, based on how many speakers it's configured for the room, how best to kind of mix the levels in real time for whatever that object is, so that it renders into the room and as close as possible the location that the engineer had in mind when they were mixing this whole thing. It's much easier to see if you can actually see a demonstration of it. But I mean, the processing that Dolby Atmos does apparently scales to over 200 speakers, because I know in their theater they have 210 or some crazy number of speakers, and they're able to render a very precise location for all these different objects in that room. So it's, instead of mixing down to 2 channels or mixing down to 5 channels, you store kind of object metadata in the file, and then allow that rendering to happen in real time, depending on whatever the capabilities of the playback system happen to be. Really interesting stuff. It seems like it's got practical application in movies and home theater, where some people may have speakers in their ceiling while other people's don't. And so the processor is left to try to figure out how best to render those audio effects, those immersive effects, using whatever speakers somebody happens to provide, assuming they're set up in some kind of reasonable way. um, the question for us as audiophiles is like, what does that do for us? Is there a future where you have to have some kind of special processor DAC that can do all this rendering or not? And does all of this fancy rendering render the DACs that we already own and love, completely useless or not? And, I don't know, but I know that for a while, DTS audio was a thing that people were doing. I bought a couple of DTS audio discs. Multi-channel music, there's some SACDs that are multi-channel, of course. DVD audio was a multi-channel thing for a little while. Way before that, there was quadraphonic stuff. None of these things have really kind of caught on, right? If you've got a really good 2-channel system, you can hear shit coming from behind your head. I swear you can, right? And a lot of you have experienced this kind of stuff with only 2 speakers in front of you. And so I don't know how useful this stuff is for audiophiles. It's not being put together for audiophiles anyway. I would not worry about this rendering your music collection or your current DAC obsolete anytime in our lifetimes. But it's, interesting to kind of follow and track along with. So like I said, Sony's come up with their own kind of version of this. DTS X is another format. There'll probably be a lot more of them. They'll all be incompatible. And I think the point of a lot of these things is to make people buy new audio equipment. My theater is my home theater is my experimentation place for stuff like this. So if I discover anything that's worth exploring, I'll be sure to mention it. Hope you will also in your own exploration. But I don't think any of this stuff supplants or replaces 2-channel as kind of our tier 1 format for really good stuff. And I don't think that'll happen anytime soon. So my opinion, but I just thought I'd throw that out there.
Yeah, we got a comment from Michael Smith that this is similar to the Bach SP with 2 stereo speakers. I don't know if you've heard of that, David, or not. The BACCH SP protocol or whatever that is. Michael Smith kind of just left a comment in the comments.
Yeah, I'm not familiar.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with it either. I think do you have any other Q&A stuff on the slides, David?
No, that is
Okay.
it. Anything else that's in the channel or in the chat?
Yeah. Yeah,
Otherwise,
there
I
was a
think we're
Steve had a question. Steve Schaefer had a question. I don't know, Steve, that I'm going to have an answer for you. What's the advantage of using Aries G2 in lieu of simply using Roon Core and sending the output to, say, a DCS upsampler? I don't know about either of those products, Steve. Does the DCS upsampler, maybe Jay, you can unmute Steve. Does it have an Ethernet connection so that you can connect directly from a music server to it?
Yeah, the nucleus, the way I use it in my system is the nucleus I'm running purely Ethernet. There's no USB in my environment at all.
Great.
So I'm running the output of the nucleus, which is running the core, feeding that to the ether regen, and then out of the ether regen on the B side, right into the upsampler, which does everything but make cappuccino. I mean, you know, it basically runs it all the way up the line. So the only question is where, I guess you were talking about the dirty side and the clean side. I mean, to me, the dirty side is mitigated by having that ether regen in the middle.
Yes, it is. That's
cleaning
correct.
stuff up. So
yes, yeah, you're correct, absolutely correct. And this is something I had to go into in length in the review for Obsolete Sound. There's kind of a technical digression that's, you know, a number of words long, but basically, as you know, Steve, and the folks that own one, Phil, I believe, has one as well, is there was a lot of attention paid to ether regen in terms of separating out all the grunge on the power, the communications protocol, the hardware on the input side from what's going out. And so that's why they use fully differential circuitry. It gets very technical very fast, but basically all of the leakage current from switch mode power supplies, the jitter from cheap ass clocks upstream, like from routers or networking devices like a cable modem or consumer grade Ethernet switch, all that stuff, you know, multiplies, it deteriorates the sound. Ether regen basically gets rid of all that grunge and it sends a very clean signal, as John Swentz would call it, clean edges, digital edges to your network audio transport or your DAC or your DCS upsampler. In terms of the Aries G2, Steve, I think it's basically just a very high-end equivalent of a like a SODIM SMS 200 or a Ultra Rendu or optical Rendu. It's because it's paid a lot of attention to cleaning things up from upstream, and also it's probably got a very, very good clock in it, right? And those two things.
Looking at it now, and it looks like it has some aspects of a music server as well. You can attach storage to it. You can connect it to Tidal and Qobuz.
Yeah. Yep.
And in my view, this and the Arrender and this whole class of products that are like this are, from an architectural perspective, like we're at a loss of where to put this thing. Does this belong on the dirty side or the clean side? It's trying to do both, right? It's doing some dirty things. It's doing some heavy duty processing. It may be doing some DSP and some other stuff. It's a thing that I would want to put on the dirty side of my network and not have anywhere near my audio system, but it's got connections for AES EBU and SPDIF and USB to go out to a DAC. And so it's like it wants to be in your audio room, but architecturally, does it really belong there? The way that they solve this, I guess, given the price tag, is they try to do as much kind of noise isolation inside of the box as possible. This is where that inverse square law works against us, right? You've got noisy things next to things that you don't want to be affected by noisy things. And so you have to go through heroic efforts and high dollar expensive solutions to try to keep those from interfering, when you can save a whole bunch of money by just putting the noisy things someplace far, far away from your audio system and not have to do all of that stuff. So, but like for some people, they'd rather spend $5 or $10 or $20,000 on a thing and not have to put a piece someplace else in their house. And you know, if that's their priority, that's their priority, I guess. But for me personally, I feel like this is a little bit the wrong architecture, although I'm sure it's lovely, and don't mean to put it down if anybody has one.
I think the G2, Aries G2 in particular, David, is functionally just a network audio transport with maybe the ability to connect an external server. It's not like, I think, an Inuos Zen where you've got computer processing going on, accessing your library and functioning as a Roon endpoint within
Okay.
that box. Hans has one, and he thinks it outperforms notably the SODEM that I've got, but it should for 4 times the price. My understanding is it does a lot of the same type of isolation that Ether Regen does. I don't know that it tackles the exact noise components like leakage current that John Swenson addresses in the Uptone audio products. But it's supposed to be very, very good. It should be for $4,000 or $4,000 plus.
I would say that if you start connecting USB hard drives to it, then I think you've thrown away pretty much all the benefits that you were going to get from it.
I would agree with that.
There's some things about this that are kind of, and you can buy it with 2 terabytes of storage as well. And I don't know, that just, to me, that seems weird. To each his own, but I don't think I would do that. Although, like I said, I'm sure it's lovely.
Just as an aside, I got a second Ether Regen today, put into my video system, and it exposed a ground loop that I hadn't even realized I'd had. And now I'm chasing that beast. And that's a pain. We ought to have a whole hour on how to find ground loops.
Well,
little buzzing sounds.
So Steve, that gets really complicated even
for
professional electronics double E's, right? Grounding problems are their own kind of weird mystical thing that you need to call in wizards and all sorts of
So where is Gandalf?
Where is Gandalf?
You need
him. We got also a question from Jan Mountjoy. Is my Berkeley Alpha USB equal to the Ether Regen? My thought is that your Alpha USB is a DAC. The Ether Regen is an Ethernet switch. And so again, our thought here is you don't want to go from a music server, whatever it is, and connect a USB cable directly to any DAC, period.
Actually, the Alpha USB is a D2D. It takes
it is. Okay.
in a USB and goes out AES EBU or SPDIF.
So it's a
I use one in my system.
USB
I have an Alpha
SPDIF adapter.
I had
it's okay. So now I understand what it is. Yes, it's a USB to SPDIF adapter. It's not equal to the Ether Regen functionally because the Ether Regen is an Ethernet switch. That's what it is. But I have used products like the Alpha USB. Shit made one called the ITER. And before Shit had the USB Gen 5 USB, I used it with a good Shunyata SPDIF cable, and it made a huge improvement in the audio quality. I mean, really significant. So those things can work really well depending on how good the USB implementation is in your DAC. And they, as Steve knows and as David knows, they vary widely. Some companies don't pay any attention to this at all. Some companies pay a lot of attention to it. But those USB receivers, depending on the DAC, can be very noisy, prone to all sorts of garbage coming into them, or they can be quite good. In fact, Shit actually did their own implementation. I'm sure Steve knows this, called Unison. About a year ago, they wrote their own USB code. They now have a license to do that. They say it's even better than their Gen 5 USB. But to answer Jan's question specifically, no, it's a different thing. I'm sure it makes a notable improvement in audio quality, but it doesn't function as an Ethernet switch.
Yeah, it's a little bit sort of closer to the DAC. So you would have the Ethernet switch, and then you'd have a network audio transport. And then the network audio transport, if it was USB out, would go into your Berkeley Alpha USB, and then that would go into the DAC via SPDIF. Kind of a little bit, it sits a little bit in the stack, a little bit closer to the DAC.
That's correct.
That's another component. And yeah, I mean, most of the DACs that I have, and I mentioned this before, that take both USB and SPDIF in, sound better with SPDIF. I don't understand why. I feel like USB should be better. You can get higher sampling rates and all this other stuff, but I guess you get more noise as well. So most DACs, if you have a good quality SPDIF source, the DAC, I think DACs either recover the clock from the source or they care about it, at least to some extent, right? So you want the source to be reasonably low jitter and have a reasonably decent clock. I think most modern DACs, even if they're SPDIF in, they do some buffering and reclocking on their own. You want the clock to be as close as possible to the DAC chip, ideally not in a separate component like we used to do back in the previous century. But even so, if you have a reasonably good SPDIF source, most DACs still today with the possible exception of some of the newer, like you were saying, the shit audio DACs. I think SML is doing some fancy stuff on the USB side, and so their USB DACs tend to measure better than their, through the USB input than the SPDIF input. So there are some exceptions, but by and large, I think your Berkeley Alpha USB will have a long and happy life in this whole ecosystem.
Yeah, I don't know this specifically about SPDIF, but the SPDIF interface. I know for a fact that USB will carry leakage current from the upstream grungy stuff into your DAC chip, into the FAS and flip-flops in your DAC, and that will cause jitter and timing errors. So this is why these, USB to SPDIF converters work well. It may well be because they don't transfer leakage current or other nasties. So, but I do know for a fact that USB will carry leakage current.
Very
so,
cool.
Yep. So I don't know if we have any other questions. Maybe we want to open up to folks if they want to ask any verbal questions.
Yeah, unmute everybody. Look so crazy.
Yeah.
I had more of a comment than a question. Just, what this last bit of discussion has all been about is what's amazing to me is how much we've learned over the last however many years about noise, power, things like that make a huge difference in sound quality that, and it seems to be getting better all the time and mitigating that. So it's pretty cool, actually.
Yeah, and I can actually expand on that point, Larry. You bring up a really good point because a lot of this stuff is being discovered in a new manner, or recently, I should say, chronologically speaking. For example, the leakage current I was referring to, the most insidious, there's two classes of leakage current. There's low source impedance leakage current and high source impedance leakage current. They both are deleterious in terms of their impact on digital audio voltages, which are, let's just remember, there's no zeros and ones. It's all analog voltages that are going from, your source to your DAC, right? There's no zeros and ones. It's all square waves, ideally. And those square waves get messed up, right? The edges get all screwed up. Anyway, but high source leakage current was only discovered by John Swenson, the guy who's developed the uptone audio ether regen, the ISO regen, and the products for Sonore in October 2017. So very recently, and he had a hypothesis that there may be another class of leakage current, this high source impedance leakage current, but there was literally, it wasn't being detected because literally the test equipment for it did not exist, literally. And he had to design a very special bespoke piece of test equipment that had high enough impedance, I think in the hundreds of mega ohm range or something like this, to actually detect high source impedance leakage current. And then he could characterize the impact it had on putting noise on the ground plane, and also what's a class of jitter called threshold jitter. And I don't want to get into that. You can go to the Uptone website and read the white paper by John. He goes into a lot of detail. It gets pretty deep, pretty fast. But Larry's right in the fact that we're still learning that what we thought was perfect sound forever is anything but. And there's a number of classes of noise factors that we're in some cases just discovering only a few years ago that really have an impact on what we hear.
I'd also say that separately, I discovered in using higher quality Ethernet cables in a networked environment, suddenly I was hearing a lot more clearly. So obviously there were other aspects of noise categories. I don't know how you describe them, whether it was jitter or whatever, or skin effects, or how you build the cable. I'll let you take that, Steve.
Yeah, so thank you for bringing that up. What Steve's referring to is we both use, no surprise, Shinada Ethernet cables. And I did an extensive, we talked about this when Kaylin was on in our guest speaker thing, but I did an extensive competitive benchmarking about a year and a half ago, renting in almost half a dozen different Ethernet cables. And the Shinada one, even the entry level, blew the other ones into the weeds. And the reason is Kalen understands, he used to work in this discipline prior to starting Shunyata, but the noise class that Steve is referring to is called common mode noise. And common mode noise has a real detrimental impact on Ethernet cables. And it specifically, my understanding is it impacts phase noise. And phase noise is exactly the kind of grunge that we get when we use cheap clocks upstream, like your generic Ethernet switch or your router or your computer that has, 25-cent clocks in them, right? They cause phase noise. All that phase noise adds up, makes the clock edges kind of smeared and grungy, and common mode noise contributes to that. And so when Kalen was designing these cables, he used his experience in telecommunications and working for the NSA to kind of get rid of this stuff and improve the signal. So that's another noise classification that, common mode noise also contributes to our digital reproduction in significant ways. And when I did some beta testing for them, they sent me a cable with no common mode noise filter on it, with 1 and with 2. And you can hear very clearly the impact of each filter as you kind of go up the chain in terms of removing more and more noise and the signal getting cleaner and cleaner and cleaner. So
sounds expensive.
they're actually, well, they're reasonably priced and actually cheaper than the AudioQuest equivalents. So.
And can you talk about how much difference the switching from an Ethernet cable to an optical cable makes in your system?
Yes. Yeah. So again, optical doesn't carry leakage current. It's only pulses of light. And so, but copper Ethernet carries leakage current just fine, again, on the ground plane. And so I believe Leslie did this some months ago, back in what, May, June timeframe, Larry? She simply, got some of these cheap fiber media converters and ran a run of optical from wherever her, server was down to her DAC, right? And had optical in between, and noticed a significant improvement. So I use optical. Now with the ether regen, if you use an ether regen, it will get rid of all that stuff for you. So there's really no advantage to running optical versus copper Ethernet if you've got an ether regen in your chain, because ether regen was designed specifically to get rid of the stuff that optical also gets rid of. Okay. However, I use optical because it's simply easier to route a line of optical from my bedroom 40 feet down to the living room. It's much easier to mount and install, and it's cheaper and it's less obtrusive visually because I can't pull Ethernet through my walls. So, but yeah, optical will make a notable difference, not only on your audio, but your video as well. So you can see these improvements in video. But what the benefit of optical is, it prevents the passage of leakage current.
But that's only one kind of noise.
It's only one kind of noise, but it's a very important one to mitigate.
So if you have a NAS, this is where it would be appropriate, because NAS devices tend to make noise anyway. You don't want them in the same room.
Right.
So you can run it from another room into your optical environment for television or your audio system, and that would be beneficial.
Yeah, and just to expand on what Steve was saying, that's a very important point. Here's why leakage current is such a big deal. Particularly high source impedance leakage current, Francesca, is it's everywhere. Every time you have a cheap ass switch mode power supply in anything, it's putting leakage current all the way down your communication chain if you're using copper Ethernet and not something like an ether regen or fiber into your DAC. And that's causing noise on the ground plane, increased threshold jitter, and potentially some phase noise. And my router is powered by a switch mode power supply. My computer is powered by a switch mode power supply. Most consumer Ethernet switches or fiber media converters are powered by switch mode power supplies. So any one of those you've got in your path, you're putting leakage current ultimately into your DAC, and that will cause audible jitter and timing errors. So again, Alex at Uptone knew all of this stuff, and he and Sean, this is why they designed the ether regen the way that they did. And again, it's one of the advantages of using opticals. You won't be passing that stuff. So, and the other solution is you can buy inexpensive but good quality linear power supplies for your devices, like your router. You can't really buy one for your server. I think you may be able to buy one for a Mac Mini requires a more expensive one. But a lot of network devices, like if you use generic TP-Link or D-Link fiber media converters or Ethernet switches, you can mitigate a lot of that leakage current by simply buying $9 to $11 Jameco ReliaPro linear power supplies from Jameco here in the Bay Area. And that will make a notable difference. It won't be as good as the more expensive ones from Small Green Computer or from Uptone, but it will be an improvement, and you'll be able to hear the difference that it makes.
And do you need them if you have your dirty stuff in a different room? Do you need them everywhere? I have 4 audio systems in my house. Do I need 4 ether regions then?
It depends. It depends on how you're wiring in your house. If they're on the same circuit, yes, potentially, or at least linear power supplies for those devices as a starting point. Again, everybody's situation is a little bit different. My condo here, I've got basically 2 buses, one on that side of the wall and one on this side of the wall, right? And my audio system's on one, and then the other side of the wall that I was using for connecting my networking stuff in the bedroom is on the other circuit, so it doesn't really cross over.
When you say the other circuit, what do you mean by that? I don't know what you mean by that.
They're not sharing power, right? They're two separate lines, two separate power lines, right? So if I put something that was noisy on the same circuit, on the same AC mains that the stereo is on, I'm going to hear that. If I put it on,
I see. You mean your electrical circuit in your house? Oh, okay.
Yes.
Okay. Got it.
Yes.
Got it. Okay.
Yes. And by the way, Steve knows this as well, because we both buy Shinata product. I don't want this to become a Shinata sales pitch, but I have a little video I can share with you guys on YouTube showing how much noise is on your AC mains. You've got all those wiring going through your house, right? And it's a big antenna for RF and EMI, and you can literally hear things like baseball on AM radio by simply hooking up a little noise sniffer onto your AC mains, and all that stuff's going into your stereo system. Unless you've got good noise reduction, like a good power distributor, and power cables that reduce noise, and digital cables that prevent noise. So there's noise everywhere. Yeah.
Along those same lines, I was reading about subwoofer setup, and I had my subwoofer plugged into the same outlet as my amplifier, and I had no idea that the subwoofer, I guess it's a plate amp, or I don't know what's causing it, but it feeds noise back into the circuit.
Right.
I unplugged that and it cleaned things up.
I think it's because, Larry, I would guess it's a Class D amplifier.
I think it's an AB.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. When you starting to knock down all the sources of noise, your system really changes. And Steve knows this as well, because he's done a lot of this as well, because we talk offline about all this stuff. But it really changes the nature of the presentation of your music. It starts to become a lot more natural sounding, a lot more quote unquote analog if you're using digital, but mostly it becomes much more relaxed and natural and organic sounding. And the more devices we have in our homes, right? Like if I move this over by the stereo, guess what? It's going to pick up all the crap from this phone and feed it into the amplifiers and stuff, and into my speaker cables and things. So, there's noise everywhere, and our world's only getting noisier. It's not getting less noisy. So
a cordless phone nearby would be a terrible thing, wouldn't it?
Anything with a switch mode power supply is going to be a terrible thing. Yeah.
Wow.
Yep.
So when you say that, Stephen, that's like a wall wart, right?
Yes.
Yes, it is.
Right.
Well, but
just for clarity,
the Jameco ReliaPros look like wall warts, okay, but they're linear power supplies, so they don't put high source impedance leakage current onto your mains or into your stereo. I don't know if you guys know SHIT that well, but SHIT has paid particular attention to this precise fact for a long, long time, since day one. I think some of their entry-level products now use a pretty good switch mode power supply, but the vast majority of them that use a wall wart style power supply, like their Modi, Uber, and whatever, Modi multi-bit, and their Manny products, even their entry-level ones, use a good, clean linear power supply. Even though it looks like a wall wart, it's actually a linear power supply.
Well, there is some linear power supplies that can serve multiple devices too. I forget the name of the one that I was looking at, but it serves multiple devices. But it's confusing to buy linear power supplies because I think you have to marry them up with the right specifications.
Yeah, but it's basically the power. So it's the volts and current. You just look on the one you've got and you order one that has the same voltage and current of the switch mode power supply you're using now. Most of them are 9 volts, 0.8 amps, or 9 volts, 1 amp, or some of them are 7 volts, 1.5 amps or something like that. But they're all in the range of 7 to 8 watts, 9 watts, 10 watts. And if you multiply volts times amps, you get power, which is watts, right?
Yeah, I've never understood, like, S Booster has 5,000 different part numbers or whatever, but I mean, come on, there's only about 25 different combinations of current and power that you can have. Plus, I guess the barrel connector may be a slightly bigger or smaller on the ends of some of them, but I mean, whatever. I think they make more of it than there really should be. I agree with you that it's, the voltage is pretty important to get right, although it's not as big of a deal as people make it. Some components are pretty flexible in what voltage. The current you don't want to go under, but you can go over as much as you want to. It's the device is not going to ask for more current than it needs.
That's right.
As long as the voltage is right.
Are there
And the
differences?
connector needs to work, or you can't plug it in.
Are there differences in the actual design of the linear power supply, or are they all sort of fall into the same category?
The wall wart style, I think, Steve, all pretty much utilize the same design. Now, Michael Smith just mentioned that Paul Hines makes linear power supplies with multiple rails. That's true. I've heard good things about those. I believe they're British, so I think you have to order them either from a distributor or from Great Britain. I use a Qobuz P3 for my SMS 200. It's also has supplies 2 rails, so you can power 2 devices with it with DC cables.
Uptone also has one called the JS2, which I use.
Yes, and that's a very good one. Yeah, that's about $1,000, I think, or something like that.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, but it's a very, very good one. John just designed that one as well. And again, that one does not pass high source leakage impedance current downstream. So that's an excellent power supply. And by the way, those of you that are using like a Mac Mini or some sort of computer, maybe an Intel NUC that wants to replace the dirty power supply in those, which again are switch mode, that JS2 is a great power supply to replace the Mac Mini internal power supply.
It only serves one component, right?
No, it serves 2.
Oh, okay.
Yep, it's got 2 rails.
Mm-hmm.
It's about $980 or something in that ballpark, I think.
Yeah,
Steve,
and I think it has multiple options. I think up to 12 volts, I think.
Yeah, it puts out a fair amount of power, and it's very well designed. So,
but the confusing thing to me, at least lately, has been trying to identify products like we were talking about subs a few minutes ago, and I'm looking at putting in a pair of subs from Paradigm that are powered about 1,000 watts, right? And I'm concerned about how much crap they might be putting in wherever I plug them in, whether it's the wall or my Everest conditioner, and knowing, what's going to affect what's going to clean up what's going to impede the current flow, which is another issue.
Yeah.
So it's
I
all
think we're
guessing game.
It is. We're getting a little off topic with the subs here, Steve.
Right, I understand.
Yeah. But yeah, I can have a discussion about that offline. But I think you'll be able to develop some solutions that work for you. Somebody had a question here, and I believe David answered it about the Renucleus as a network audio transport. David said it's not a network audio transport; it's a music server, and you don't want to connect it directly to a DAC. So the Nucleus would be pretty dirty.
And it's a shame too, right? Because it's such a beautiful box. It screams, "Put me on your audio rack. I want to be right in your room with you." That's not where it belongs, though.
No,
so
belongs as far away as possible. So
you're talking about the Roon Nucleus,
Yeah, I wish they'd made it uglier. It's such a pretty machine, but it
Yeah.
doesn't belong in your audio system. Sorry.
No, it does not. No, nowhere near.
Well, see, that's what I have. I have the Roon, I have a router, I have a Ethernet switch. I have 3 devices right there in front of everything.
Yeah, you want to separate those. Even I think, Francesca, moving them to the other side of the room would help. We can talk offline about how to do this. The best starting point, I think I wrote you about this a couple of weeks ago, is to get an Ether regen, and then you can, quite simply, if you got an Ethernet switch, you can connect everything to your upstream Ethernet switch and run one good cable from that to your Ether regen, and you'll be golden. So it's not difficult to solve your problem. Even a Shinyata Venom will be a big step up over. Believe me, I've auditioned a bunch of Ethernet cables, including AudioQuest, and I don't want to sound like a choir boy here, but even the entry level one blew the other ones into the weeds.
How did Blue Jeans cable fare? Blue Jeans Ethernet.
Oh, it was
cable.
horrible. It was horrible. It drove me out of the room inside of 5 minutes.
My God.
It was awful.
I'm all Blue Jeans.
Yeah. So anyway, I don't want to
Thanks
get off
for that.
into a digression. I don't want to sound like an acolyte. I'm just telling you what I did in terms of experiments and my findings. Nothing more than that. So,
good to know.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you're someone like me, I've been using my Roon nucleus in my rack, but it has been connected to the Ether regen. So I've been, mitigating the ugliness and allowing myself the beauty of the box.
Right.
I mean, it's fanless, so it's not. You shouldn't make a lot of acoustic noise.
Right. It's called nucleus because it's an expensive NUC in an expensive chassis. It's an Intel NUC in a nice case that costs about 3 times what a NUC costs you.
Right. But they do optimize it by taking advantage of some of the Intel goodies that Intel provided to them. But that's about it.
There's some thermal optimization so that you can run it in a case without a fan, and that's useful.
Right.
The Control 4 stuff is nice if you're a Control 4 geek.
Right.
They don't offer that.
Right.
I went to
version.
I went to our local Berkeley store. Steve knows the one I'm referring to, and they tried to sell me a bill of goods that the code for Roon is different for a NUC than for a nucleus than the Roon that you would normally download yourself. It's BS. The only code that's in a nucleus is to operate the nucleus. There's nothing in code that affects the audio quality whatsoever.
Yeah.
And that's on the Roon webpage about the nucleus. So
it's just optimization of function.
Yeah, it's strictly for hardware,
right?
Not for audio quality. So yes, Jeff, it was Music Lovers. So anyway, I like the store a lot. I bought a lot of stuff from them, but sometimes they try to sell you a bill of goods and you just need to kind of counter with like facts and data. So anyway, enough about that. i-Fi, I've tried an i-Fi. It is a switch mode power supply. It does cause leakage current, high source leakage current. Again, it's quite a bit more money than an $11 Relia Pro. You can try it out. I've got one. I don't use it. And you can hear the noise that it puts onto a system with that. What's that thing? Steve, you probably have one as well. It's the noise thing that you can hook up to your AC mains. It will put noise over a speaker. The NTech noise analyzer. I should show you guys that sometime. But anyway. Cool. Yeah, I can lend it to folks too if they want to listen to the noise on their AC mains. I can let you guys borrow it.
I was just going to ask that question. How can we listen to all this noise and know when we've actually copied it or not?
I'll send you the NTech, Francesca, and you can sniff it out wherever you want. But it's pretty remarkable. I'll send you guys a link to my YouTube video, where the one that Steve is referring to, and you can hear how much noise there is on our AC mains. It's not inconsiderable. Let me just put it that way. So
Stephen?
Yeah.
You've been using my name, but I haven't been saying anything.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were the person asking the question. So
no.
Okay. It must have been somebody else. I apologize for getting.
No problem.
Was that Joy that was asking? Oh, okay.
Jan.
Sorry, Joy.
Jan, I was asking.
Jan. Sorry. I couldn't
I was
tell.
wondering where Francesca was.
No,
Okay.
sorry. So I mixed you guys up. I apologize for that. So
Boxes are like right next to each other. They're like this far apart.
yeah. Okay. So
Zoom.
I'm not really looking at the people on the screen. I'm looking at all the questions coming in the chat to make sure we cover everything here. So, but anyway, I hope that answered your questions, Jan. And
Yes.
yes, sorry, Francesca. So, Joy and Francie. Oh, okay. Anyway, we're coming up almost on 8. Do we have any other questions for David or myself?
Do I need to change my Ethernet cable to Shunyata?
I would recommend it. Yeah.
Running through the walls? Oh my God.
No, only at the endpoint. Okay. So the most important place is between whatever network audio transport you have that's going to go to your DAC, right? Whatever Ethernet cable comes into that prior to the USB cable that goes to your DAC, if you're using a USB DAC, just the last, they all make a difference, but the last one is the most important one.
Okay, where the switch is then.
Yes. So if you've got a switch and you've got all your network connections coming in, again, I really recommend the Ether Regen. But let's say you have an Ether Regen, right? You've got your router, your server, going into A side of Ether Regen, and then you've got B side going to your network audio transport. The most important cable is that one from the B side of Ether Regen to your network audio transport. That's where I would start. The other one that's important, if you want to budget for this later, is from your music server to your switch. That one makes a difference as well, but it's not as critical as the most downstream Ethernet cable is the one that's most important.
That's good news. I can afford that.
Yep.
It's Francesca.
Yeah.
On that network switch that you were talking about that I'm definitely interested in. Do we know how many other people in the club might be interested in? Maybe we can do a bulk buy?
No, that won't happen. So it's already really cheap. Yeah, that question came up, I believe, when we had Alex on as a guest. It only costs $640. This switch is fully competitive with switches costing $2,000 to $4,000, Francesca.
Oh no, I definitely.
Yeah,
I definitely agree. It just seems like there's some interest with several people.
Yeah, but he doesn't do group discounts. He's already operating at a pretty thin margin on these.
Just chime in for a second, Dave.
Yeah,
Stephen, I won the Ether Regen on that call with Alex, and I can't use it because of where my router and all that stuff is located. So I've been loaning it out for people to try it out and see if they want it. If they can get one.
Yeah.
Oh, I'd love to borrow it. Oh my goodness, yes.
I guess Larry's going to have it tomorrow or sometime, so get in touch with him.
Yeah. I'll tell you, it's probably been that and my network audio transport, Francesca, have been the two most significant devices that have taken my digital system to a level where it's hard, if not impossible, to distinguish from my analog turntable system in terms of audio quality. Steve, you have one as well. I take it you're happy with it as well.
I'm very happy. I've had mine for nearly a year.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. I believe when we did the interview, Francesca, with Alex, this is back in the June or July timeframe. They had sold 1,500 of them to date. They have, and by the way, there's no risk in buying one if you don't like it. You can return it within 30 days, no questions asked, for a full refund. Okay, you're only going to be out 3-year warranty. No questions asked, full refund. You're only out the shipping cost to send it back to, wherever Alex lives up near the west side of the Sierra there. But they sold 1,500 worldwide. As of July, they probably sold close to 2,000 now or thereabouts. They've only had 5 returned. So that is like, I did a quality score assessment on that. That's like a 0.03% return rate or 0.3% return rate, which is pretty good. So when you're batting 99.97%, you're doing pretty good. So I think you'd be really happy with it.
Yeah. So
I'm definitely going to get it.
Okay.
I know that I'm going to do that.
Yeah, just let me know if you're interested in borrowing the regen, and we'll get you in line to send it around. It's very kind of Phil.
Yes.
Four.
There was a question, what kind of network audio transport do I use? I use the SMS, the SOTM, S-O-T-M, SMS 200 Ultra Neo. It sells right around for about $1,000, $1,100, something like that. And it's an upgrade to the original SMS 200. And the additional cost to the original SMS 200 is due to the much better clock circuit that they put in the Ultra Neo. So it's got a very, very good clock in it. And I highly recommend it. It was clearly better than my original micro Rendu. So
I don't understand what an audio transport is. I'm sorry.
So Jan, an audio transport, basically it's very simple. It's taking a network input connection from all your upstream stuff, right? Your server that may come from, go through an Ethernet switch and then downstream to your audio rack. And all it's doing is it's taking Ethernet in and putting out USB.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's what it does.
Ethernet in, okay.
USB out.
Ethernet in, USB out. Sometimes they're SPDIF out, but I mean,
yeah, for the most part,
it basically lets you take a traditional DAC that's SPDIF or USB in and put it on your network so that you can stream to it, because you can't stream to a DAC unless you have a network connection. And if your DAC, some DACs like sell with a network connection on them already, and if your DAC doesn't have one, and most of them don't even today, you need a network audio transport. It's kind of like that USB to SPDIF adapter, right? Except it's for 2020, where instead of adapting USB to SPDIF, we're adapting Ethernet to USB or
USB.
Yeah. So it's that kind of thing. But yeah. And people will make these things out of Raspberry Pi computers for $35. Like that's kind of the starting point at making at setting up something like this. And then you can spend as much as you want to on it.
Mm-hmm.
The fact is the history of most digital playback has involved computers, and computers were almost solely USB based in terms of how they managed everything. You rarely saw anything that was Ethernet or otherwise network based until maybe within the past 5 years.
Yeah.
So that's why it's popular. That's why you see a lot of, I mean, one of the most important cables that came out recently from Shunyata was not the Ethernet, but the year before was the USB. And it was, again, an exceptional cable.
Yes, it was. It was incredible. It was a component level upgrade for me.
Right.
It was as important. It was made as big a difference as putting in a better preamp, literally.
Boy.
So it depends on whether you're wagging, if the tail is wagging the dog or the dog is wagging the tail.
Yeah.
The good thing is that, I mean,
love your DAC and it's limited by, I'm going to only be able to go in USB, then you have to come up with a solution. In my case, I've got a Yggdrasil, right? So I'm using that Berkeley D to D converter and a micro Rendu, or excuse me, a Sonore Ultra Rendu. And so I've got this connected to that, and finally it all works.
The good news is that, I mean, it really, kind of top tier audiophile interconnects, can run you $3,500 a pair.
Oh,
or whatever.
easy.
You look at
Easy.
Wire World,
Easy.
all these other places. Really good.
I feel
you'll
guilty.
struggle to find one that's more than $1,000, and they're terrific ones that are $300 or
Right.
so. And so, just like anything else in digital audio, the price points where you're looking at these things to get really good performance, don't feel like you need to spend $3,500 on a USB cable or $1,000 on a network cable. You don't need to spend that kind of money to get like ridiculous performance from these things.
You need to balance. I mean, if you put all your eggs in one basket, you're probably going to wind up with a hole in your basket.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I know it sounds like these are expensive, but I promise you the stuff that the guys in the audio, the analog meetup, the stuff that they're talking about is more than what we're talking about here, generally speaking.
A good cartridge, a good arm.
You can get into 5 figures with a digital system, but I really doubt that you need to be completely satisfied, unless you're just very particular, and want pretty things.
Oh, the cables make a big difference for the digital stuff. There's no question about it. This is off topic, Jeff. If you're interested in my 2 preamp, let me know offline. I'm selling one. That's just, sorry for the aside for that. And then we had a question from Anthony on the USB cables. There's 3, Anthony, from Shinada, Delta, Alpha, and Sigma. That's on their website. The Delta is quite affordable. I think it's in the range of $400 or so, in that range. And again, I used to have an AudioQuest Diamond USB cable. Steve probably knows it as well. And I thought I used that for 5 years, and I thought that was the best thing I'd heard, but no longer. Anyway, I don't want this to, again, get sidetracked into Shinada acolyte behavior. So anyway. So we're almost at 8 o'clock.
Questions? Anything else?
Any other questions before we break for this month?
Yeah, I had a question.
Yeah.
So when I was on Qobuz, I found an artist that I really liked, but she did not have a CD or a LP or anything. So really the only way of getting it was to purchase it through the Qobuz store, which I did. How do I, now that I purchased it, how do I get it from the Qobuz into my my NAS? So that I don't have to own, I don't have to keep paying for Qobuz if I don't want to.
Yeah, I don't know this. I think you can download it, Francesca, but I don't know if it will remain resident, say, on your internal hard drive. If you don't have a Qobuz subscription, you'll have to reach out to Qobuz for an answer to that.
I've actually done that. I bought things and I can't describe to you from memory the process, but in the process of downloading, you pay attention to where it goes, and it goes into like a Qobuz folder. And then I just grabbed that and put it into a folder on my NAS. So
and I think it's you download it in a FLAC format. It's not like some sort of DRM block or whatever, right?
They just, as a matter of course, put it in their location to where Qobuz knows where it's at. But if you put it in the other location, Qobuz won't play it, but then you can play it through Roon or whatever your music server is that you're using.
Cool. Thank you, David.
Same thing like getting something from HD Tracks.
There's a lot of artists that don't have the ability to do CDs or LPs.
I think you're going to find that more and more, and so it's an astute observation and something that we got to pay attention to. As we want to try to explore new music, that not everybody is going to be a Lynn Stanley or somebody and actually contract with companies to create physical media. Not everybody's passionate about that, but they are passionate about their art and getting it out there, and they're going to follow that path of least resistance to do that and kind of bypass some of these traditional modes of doing so.
Yeah, so if it's not on Amazon, you might find it on Bandcamp or some other unusual distribution technique.
But better it's not on a CD, so you don't have to dispose of that in a landfill with all of the toxic waste that CDs contain.
Correct.
I have all that toxic waste in my basement, so there's that.